Hi everyone, we are Team M2C and we are going to be talking on a topic that is frequently discussed but rarely addressed at its root: employee mental health and well being. We plan to examine how organizational architecture, leadership, judgment, and the financial pressures of something called short termism actually design mental health outcomes in our workplace. So, for decades, employee mental health has been parked in the HR department as a policy issue or a wellness initiative. But what the data actually tells us is that it's more of a central strategic risk than many believe. For instance, the Black Dog Institute identified that mental illness is now the leading cause of sickness, absence, and long term work incapacity. Additionally, 76% of employees report experiencing symptoms like anxiety or burnout every single year. As many of you remember, we had the huge burnout phenomenon after COVID, and these haven't gone away. These aren't just isolated or individual clinical cases, but it really leads to more of a structural signal. The central thesis of this presentation and our corresponding paper is that employee mental health is an outcome of organizational systems and not simply individual pathology, but it is rather shaped by how we design jobs, manage performance, and govern our finances. Before we go further, I really want to draw a sharp line between mental health and well being. So, mental health refers to an individual's psychological functioning, specifically the presence or absence of conditions like depression, anxiety, or burnout. And it is symptomatic that directly affects absenteeism and productivity. Well being is the organizational ecosystem. It encompasses psychological safety, perceived fairness, and a sense of belonging. Well being just isn't the absence of illness, it really has to do with the presence of structure, conditions that allow people to function sustainably. This distinction is crucial for leaders. Mental health captures the strain, but well being captures the entire ecosystem that either mitigates or amplifies that strain. So, what happens when ecosystems are poorly designed? The research by Blank et al. Reveals that the strongest predictors of a delayed return to work after a mental health absence aren't the clinical pieces of individual psychology, but rather the organizational structure that they are going back into. Low job grades, high job stressors, and poor supervisor communications are seemingly the real culprits here. When we look at Simon's framework on job design, we see exactly why. When the employee's span of accountability exceeds their span of control, they experience chronic performance pressure without the authority to manage it. Furthermore, as Groisberg points out, the strain often concentrates on critical roles. Repeated absenteeism in these roles disrupts overall team cohesion, institutional memory. In short, mental health is about the systemic alignment and not just the personal resilience. So, when looking at one of the biggest drivers of this systemic alignment, performance management. Performance systems are fundamentally psychological architectures. Capelli and Tavis argue that traditional high stakes annual appraisals activate defensive behavior and sustained anticipatory stress. This is where organizational justice comes really into play. RISE research shows that disruptive justice, or the fairness of rewards, interactional justice, how respectfully managers communicate, significantly correlate with mental health. I think we can all think about the strain of a manager who does not communicate respectfully versus one who does really impacts us as we leave work. If an organizational focuses purely on output metrics and neglects the fairness and dignity, its performance management system becomes psychologically corrosive. This brings us to a really interesting paradox. We all want employees who are highly engaged and identify strongly with our company's mission. But RISE research finds that organizational identification actually acts as a multiplier for mental health outcomes. If an employee identifies highly with the company and its perceived system as fair, their well being skyrockets. But if they are highly invested and perceive injustice, their psychological distress is heavily amplified. High performance cultures create high emotional investments, which means leadership lapses in fairness have a much more devastating impact. I've actually seen multiple scenarios of this where employees do better in like a larger corporate blah type mission, uh, as they aren't as invested versus if they really truly are invested in what they're doing and there's that idea of unfairness, you're going to have much angrier or much more stressed employees. So, this all brings to the idea of why smart leaders actually allow these corrosive systems to persist. The answer that we're seeing typically lies in financial governance. Show me the money. As Peter Capelli notes, financial accounting rules treat investments in people, like training and well being, as immediate expenses and not long term assets. This incentivizes that what Austin and his co authors call performance hacking. Leaders under pressure for short term financial optics will cut development budgets, reduce workforce buffers, and squeeze their teams, which ultimately creates immediate margin improvements, but it erodes human resilience. Chronic insecurity emerges, mental health deterioration, and therefore we see a direct outcome frequently of short term financial governance. What this really comes down to is if mental health is structurally embedded, our solutions must be structural too. A subscription to a meditation app is not going to fix a broken job design. It will simply put a band aid over it. As managers, we must really focus on these four key aspects. Institutionalized fairness by distributive and interactional justice must be audited and enforced, not just cultural slogans. Aligning and accountability with control, we must really focus on recalibrating roles where expectations and systematically exceeds resources. We've all been in those places where our resources are minimal and yet our expectations are high. We need to shift performance conversations and really separate coaching from compensation to really reduce that anticipatory stress and resisting that financial myopia. Stop treating workforce buffers and development as expendable costs, our short term fix. To conclude, employee mental health is a leading indicator of organizational design quality. When mental illness becomes the primary cause of long term work incapacity, the issue has left the medical realm and really entered the managerial one. It requires deep introspection into our structures, our financial logics, and our leadership behaviors. Organizations that fail to internalize this will inevitably see a decline in the very asset their strategic execution depends on, their workforce. Thank you so much, and please let us know if you have any additional questions. Thank you.